my God, these are all women. Yes, women power.
Amazing.
I would like to welcome Bea and also Ibu Yulia, our moderator for today. And I'd like to welcome all of the participants here. And actually, there's about 90 people who registered. Maybe they will be coming as we go along. So Bu Yulia, Bea is a very, very old friend of mine. So we've met a couple of years back when she did her research, and an amazing scientist, woman scientist, and always inspires me with all the work that she has been doing. So it's really an honor today to be listening to her talk, and especially on issue of implicit biases that we know it's there, but we don't talk about it. So, Bea, Bu Yulia is one of my very dear friends. She's also, she's an anthropologist, she's smart, she's everything. And she's also working a lot on issue on women. So this is very the right combination of Bea and Yulia. So I just would like to thank both of you for coming and for presenting and the discussion that we will be doing today. And for all the participants, today we're going to discuss about the other issue, not the conservation issue per se, but also the wider issue of the women scientists, southern, north, etc. So it's really exciting to for us to have both of you here. And I see Pak Surya there also. Hi, Pak Surya, also an old friend.
Hi,
yeah, so that's all from me. I think I'll just go straight to Bu Yulia, maybe, yeah?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Hello, Bea. It's always nice to put a face on her name. And good afternoon to everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to learn more from Bea today. Thank you so much also, Budami, for your kind words. Yes, well, it is also already introductions from you, or I would like also to provide a space for you to give introductions, maybe a little bit introductions about CTSS before we enter our discussions today with Bea. So I give it back to you, Putami.
Okay, yes, usually we have a moderator, I mean an MC or something, but maybe I jumped too quickly, but that's okay. So a little bit introduction of CTSS. So CTSS is a Center for Transdisciplinary and Sustainability Science. Here in this center, we work across stakeholders, across disciplines, trying to understand what sustainability, trying to develop sustainability sciences, and also working with the local community. We believe that sustainability, at the heart of sustainability is local knowledge. So here we try to co-create knowledge to find what sustainability works in different parts of Indonesia. And for that, we believe that we cannot work alone, and learning from the past, traditional knowledge, is a very important part of sustainability for the future. So that's CTSS in a nutshell. So we have different platforms for discussion and learning together. And one of the platform is called the Graduate Student Sustainability Seminar. So at first it was just IPB students who attend our seminar, but with the COVID, then we expand this for students, whoever who wants to join. So usually we have students from other university and even the public. So it has expanded more than just graduate seminar in IPB. So that's GSSS in a nutshell. And yeah, I would like to welcome all of you who are here. Thank you, Bu Yulia.
Thank you. Very brief, very brief introduction from CTSS. So before we enter our discussions, let me introduce firstly about Bea. Today, we are going to listen and to learn from Bea on overcoming implicit bias in the tropical conservation community for better research and practice. Bea's work is focused on conservation and management of biodiversity in agroecological landscape. Integrating approaches from ecology, conservation, communications, and socioecology is central to her work in conservation science and practice, as well as promoting diversity, equity, and inclusions in the international science community. Currently based at the University of Vienna in Austria and co-affiliated to institutes in Peru, Germany, and Italy, she works internationally as a senior scientist, lecturer, scientific editor, and sustainability communicator. Bea studied biology at the University of Vienna in Austria and completed her Ph.D. in agroecology at the University of Göttingen in Germany. For her research, she centered her life in Indonesia for 7 years from 2008 until 2014 and recently moved to her study in regions in Italy. Since 2016, she also works as associate editor of the scientific journals Biological Conservation and Perspective in Ecology and Conservation. Since 2020, she is the principal investigator of 3 international research projects: Eco Olives in Italy, Compass in Italy and Indonesia, Sounds Wild in Italy and Austria, and Eco Cacao in Peru. All focus on the conservation and management of biodiversity, as well as the effective communications and implementations of conservation policies in agroecological landscape. So, selamat datang, Bea. Pastinya bisa berbahasa Indonesia sedikit, atau malah mungkin sudah fasih bahasa Indonesia, karena cukup lumayan di Indonesia,
Yeah.
Indonesia juga. So, terima kasih. Thank you so much for offering your insights today. Really looking forward to learn from you about the relationship between the sociocultural diversity, intellectual diversity, and biodiversity. So I leave to you, Bea. We are willing to listen and to learn from you.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you all very much for the invitation. Selamat sore, everybody. It's always an honor to talk about these topics too. So as Yulia just mentioned, I'm mainly ecologist and conservationist, but also for some years we are working on the topic or the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really central globally, I would say, and in all the fields, but particularly also in the field of conservation science, tropical ecology, achieving the sustainable development goals, and many goals we're working towards to, and this is what my talk will be about. So I share my slides now and ask you for a short feedback if it's working. So, do you see the slides in presentation mode?
Yes, but not in the full screen. Yes, thank you.
It's in presentation mode, full screen now? Yes, okay, perfect. So this presentation I put together to talk about overcoming implicit bias in the tropical conservation community for better research and also better practice. So what does that mean? First, we have to talk quickly about what is implicit bias. In a nutshell, would be what we don't think that we actually think. So the implicit bias is implicit, so it's mainly unconscious. We cannot help it. It's things that we have inside us. We grow up, like the way we grow up with, how we grow up, the experiences we make, and that like our world is full of stereotypes. And from a biological perspective, this also in the early development stage especially helps us to survive, no? To make decisions easier. Sometimes we have to categorize in the thinking to make all the decisions easier, because otherwise when everything would be completely complex, that would be overwhelming. But can I go on here? Yeah. The implicit bias is really the unconscious attitudes and beliefs. So it's particularly tricky to work on implicit biases because they are inside us, like unaware gut reactions, subconscious feelings, behaviors, and judgments towards people without a conscious knowledge. We associate to some stereotypes. No, it's very often, for example, the case for women, as we know, or people who dress in a certain way, or people also even from certain countries. But the good news is that we can make ourselves aware of how biased we are, and we can actively train kind of against it. We can try to work against the bias. And why is this important, working against the bias? Because having this bias present in our community all the time can directly affect the outcomes, the success, also the well-being at different workplaces, in our networks, in the societies we work in the groups, on all these different levels. This can have a huge impact. So we also see increasing evidence and increasing communication about this issue all over the media. So how implicit bias and lack of diversity undermine science. There are many very interesting articles out of this. For example, when we look at this article I just showed up here, 50 years of children drawing scientists show that, for example, young children increasingly also draw a woman as a scientist. That used to be almost only men or white men young children would draw on an international scale if they would be asked, please draw a picture of a scientist. Then the overwhelming majority of them would have painted a white man. And this, of course, is affecting the field of conservation science, tropical ecology a lot. There are also increasingly movements. There's more and more visibility of actions such, just for example, the Women in Science Day by the United Nations programs, for example. But still, implicit biases do affect our beliefs and behaviors in our community. Why should we address this problem? Beyond the moral knowledge that we have to work towards equality and inclusion and diversity more, there are also some hard facts. Sadly, there are not so many assessments for science yet. So here I take two examples from economy, actually, where this has been assessed a lot. So for example, big companies like Google do not primarily, I think, work on diversity, equity, and inclusion because of they want to be the most moral organization in the world. They do work on these issues because there's like a very distinct, significant financial return also working on this, and an innovation return. So for example, companies that rank highly for gender diversity perform by 16% better. And those with greater ethnic diversity perform like 35% better than the lower ranking organizations, according to Harvard Business Review. Also, companies with above average diversity produce a greater proportion of revenue from innovation, astonishing 45% in total. And companies with a low, below average diversity, only 26%. And these 19% difference are also related to a significant better financial performance of these companies. If we turn this into our perspective in the scientific community, this would mean it makes our work much more effective, innovative, and actionable, successful. To pick up one of the examples very relevant to us is that also we know, like in many connections, interrelations, that achieving, for example, the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is gender equality, is absolutely central to achieving most of the other SDGs, because this is pushing innovation and successful implementation so much. Actually, we started working, visibly working and publishing on this topic during the pandemic, because throughout my whole career, as you also saw in the introduction of what I'm doing, of my background, you see, I also worked in, like, my origin is actually also quite international, but still I grew up most of the time, my life Central Europe, but my work is highly international. So I lived and worked, for example, 7 years in Indonesia for my diploma, for my PhD, for working on an organization. Now I work for more than 6 years also in Peru. I have many colleagues. My network is highly international. And in the pandemic, me and some of my international colleagues, we could clearly see also that these biases we have in the scientific community were leading to an unequal treatment that was gender biased and geographically biased in the community. So in other words, many of my colleagues in tropical countries were struggling more with the challenges of the pandemic than, for example, my colleagues in Central Europe. And in Central Europe, we could clearly see that, for example, women who had to combine their household work in the lockdown and so on were struggling much more than most of the men. So we have a really clear bias that in, for example, these times of our society is clearly affecting us and affecting the productivity, the innovation, and the impact of our scientific work, also on a personal level, of course. So this was an article we were really happy to be able to publish in Nature in Ecology and Evolution because it got a large visibility and a huge response. And this made us work more on these kind of topics. So when I talk about DEI, I use the acronym in my talk. I mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, so diversity would mean we have all kinds of colors, characters, backgrounds, geographic backgrounds, gender types, and all the kind of diversity we can imagine, especially the representative one that we need. So here I'm talking about gender representation, for example, because we know that especially in higher, in leadership levels in the scientific community, women get more and more underrepresented, but also many other parts of our community that we want to represent as a scientific community, but we do not, because often we just don't have them, especially in later stages in the career. So, for example, when we don't have single moms in leadership positions in scientific communities, when we don't have LGBTQ+ members, then we also likely don't represent their interests in our research, no? Because people who are not part of a certain group of the society will not well represent these topics, which are relevant to the whole society, because these minorities from the scientific group present a non-minority and a relevant group in our society. And this is a good explanation why many things are not working out as we want them to work, because we are not addressing the interests and like the motivational points of large parts of the community. Equity is especially important here because it doesn't only help, and I will talk about this in more detail later, if we just have 50%, for example, women and men. On the one hand, because there's much more than women and men when we talk about diversity, but also it's not about just having them sitting there and saying hi. It's about the quality of their positions. It's that we have equity would mean we have an equal distribution of leadership positions, opportunities, chances, career opportunities, for example. Yeah, and inclusion would also mean that basically everybody is invited also equally, again, to contribute to this community. So with this, I don't want to give just another talk on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would like to be very specific. So I picked some specific studies to focus on a specific part in this community. But there are many interesting talks out there that I highly recommend. And I always like to listen to these TEDx talks, for example. And there's a lot you can find. So once I opened for myself this universe of working on DEI, unconscious bias, communication as an ecologist, I really love to dive into it because I see it makes my work so much more effective, successful, high quality, whatever. And what I want to focus on today is the tropical science community. So what we often see here, I cite some background studies, that conservation research, for example, conserving biodiversity, is often not happening where it's most needed. So we see that biodiversity declines happens especially in mega biodiverse tropical countries, but these are, for example, not the countries where the most articles are coming from. So there's a bias. We have in the areas where we have, let's say, the largest issues, we have the smallest numbers of articles coming from there. So comparatively less research from most biodiverse regions or countries. Also, and this is critical, we see that the research that is coming from these countries, or also in general, internationally, is often not led by researchers that are based in this country. So we have often this phenomenon, for example, of parachute science, where people from the global south, for example, are leading science, people from the global north, from Western countries, are leading science in global south and Eastern countries, for example. So, and of course, this is also affecting how the acceptance, the implementation of this kind of research. Then we also see that in the decision-making processes related to scientific evidence, so we get the numbers out and the scientific evidence, and then we want to integrate this knowledge into decision-making, into policies, for example. And we see that this bias is really affecting all the areas relevant to our work, also international fora. For example, the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. They show a strong gender bias and a geographic bias, as you see in these two graphs here, both for the nominated experts and also for the citations of these experts. Really interesting. The same is the case for another very important panel, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Also here we see, for example, strong gender and geographic biases. And when I talk about these kind of biases, I want to emphasize these are just two examples of many more biases that we are facing. But some of the biases that we can study quite straightforward, but I also come to the limitations of that in a few minutes. So these biases occur both in the nominations and in the citations. And again, of course, this is affecting. We are, simply put, we are lacking very crucial perspectives here again, not only in the number of articles, but also here in these decision-making processes, in these platforms and panels that are very, very powerful in their decision-making, but they're not, they're biased. When we look at publications, and this is the topic I'm particularly interested in because I'm also since more than 6 years now very active editor of 2 journals. I'm particularly active in the journal Biological Conservation, where we have not so many associate editors, and that means that each of our associate editors, we are around 10 to 13 people usually, I would say. By the way, I see that my camera is slow. Do you hear me well without interruptions? Yeah. Otherwise, please interrupt.
No problem. No problem.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm happy to repeat, of course. So I work as an editor for a very long time. I get different articles, and I'm very happy to work, for example, Biological Conservation, because it's a team where we exchange a lot. We work a lot on improving on all kinds of different levels, also regarding DEI issues. And there I handled more than 1,000 articles so far. And I'm very, very much appreciating this opportunity to work there, because of course I see and read many articles that I would not read by myself. I get a good overview of the community. And what I also always see, and this is very nicely summarized here, for example, in a study of Martin Nunes and colleagues for a Journal of Applied Ecology, where they're working. And we face the same, for example, in Biological Conservation, and I have some other editor colleagues that are facing the same in other journals. So we can say it's quite representative also for other journals in conservation and ecology, that we see here that the number of submitted papers is strongly biased towards the global north. And then also, which is really critical, the number of accepted papers. And this is due to several issues. We see that also language issues are often affecting the scientific community. So we know, for example, this is just one example picking out again, most of the scientific articles are published in English, especially of the so-called or the assessed high impact journals, that where we also often need publications as scientists in order to proceed in our career internationally. So here you see the global distribution of these articles in in Journal of Applied Ecology between only 2 recent years, 2015 to 17. Then you also see some numbers on the readership and the published papers per million people in different countries. You see this bias is true for all these different levels we're looking at. Here I would like to citate, to quote this very nice statement from, on-point statement from their discussion. So this almost complete lack of representation from certain regions is deeply concerning, and the problem does not have a simple solution, of course. And I also come to this later. Of course, there are some factors that are out of the control of us as a scientific community, like a long-standing history of a country, the wealth of a certain region, the security of certain countries. But we shall not forget, we must not forget that there are a lot of factors, a lot of issues that are in our control, actually. So how we treat each other, how we make hiring decisions, how we put together our network, how we do literature research. Me as an editor, who do I invite for a review? Which papers do I accept? Where is my bias? I have to evaluate my own bias and work on it, because my interest as a conservationist and ecologist is that we proceed with conservation and ecology topics. And I'm highly aware through working in this area now for some years that we can only if we are really working on the improved diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have to prioritize that, clearly. And now I come to some body of research that we have been doing, or I was centrally involved in. And here the background is, if we look back on some examples that I looked at, we are aware in our community that diversity is the backbone of resilient ecosystems. Ecosystem resilience is based on some diversity of species, biotic intactness of species. There's this very nice study from Newbold, for example, showing that on the majority of the terrestrial surface on our planet, so more than 65% of the terrestrial surface, especially land use and many related pressures, they cause the biotic intactness of global ecosystems to decline beyond 10%. And this is beyond the so-called planetary boundaries. So actually the capacities that we have, the possibilities that we have. And we see this really clearly, for example, with the example of climate change, how unpredictable many processes are becoming, and this is progressing really fast. So reconciling these issues requires higher diversity, as we just saw in the introduction. And so we as editors, for example, of biological conservation, were interested how diverse is the author.
Well, we cannot hear you there.
No? Sorry.
Yes, now it's okay. We lose you again.
It's unfortunate, my computer. Just 1 second. You hear me again?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, I'm so sorry. So, yeah. Is it we have been here? Yeah. And so, because we know that leadership positions are often based, are often promoted based on the publication output. This is still one of the main criteria internationally taken into account in hiring decisions. Also, this is quite critical. We discuss later. So who are these top publishing authors? that very often become also the leaders in our community. We looked at the 13 leading journals in ecology and conservation and evolution research. Here we only focus on some papers or some journals that primarily publish main research articles. So we excluded papers that or journals that mainly focus on perspectives, for example, to have like a more comparable set. And this is based mainly on impact factor also here. And here we identified for each journal who are the 100 top publishing authors, or the authors that published most of the papers in each of this journal over the last 75 years. So this is all the data that we have. We started with the Web of Science archiving for these journals and authorships in 1945. So this is where we started assessing the data, and this data set goes until 2019. One figure that is already concerning that we see when we look at all these articles, and then on the bottom you see the total value for the journals. So we identified out of these 13 journals and more than 1,500 records that we got for authors, 1,051 individual top publishing authors. So each of the authors is also represented only one time in the data set. So if they were the most publishing authors in several journals, which we have, really interesting cases, then we took the journal of that author where that person had the most articles. And then for all these individual 1,051 top publishing authors, we identified gender. And here we went with binary gender, which of course is not ideal, but something that we could assess because we're just not ready yet, I would say, to go beyond the binary gender if we assess a large data set, because we would not have been able to ask every single of these persons or like a sufficient size of this group how they identify themselves. So we identified binary gender mainly on names and pictures in some cases. And some self-identification. So this took, Then we have the country data, which is mainly like the affiliation where they published. So also here, we did some research throughout the career of some people. It was surprisingly clear for most of them. But of course, this is becoming less easy to assess in the future because people tend to have much more positions throughout their career. We also assess the position of the author. So it's a first author, last author, or somewhere in between. The number of citations of each of these papers. And then we also got data from the World Bank on the gross domestic product per capita per country population size for all the countries we had represented through the affiliations in this data set. So in short, we look at who is the top publishing authors and how are the results for gender bias, binary gender bias, and geographic bias. And what we already see here for the journals, this would always be like 100% bars here for all the different journals. And the green small bars are the women in these journals. So clearly a strong minority throughout the 75 years. So when we look at all these journals together and all the top publishing authors together, we only find 11% women. Let's look in a bit more detail. 11% women, and 75% of all these top publishing authors, they are only from 5 countries in the world. This is a nice poster summarizing our results from this paper. So, this is the summary again of the articles. We see that all top publishing authors come from only, altogether, in the last 75 years, all the top publishing authors, they were from only 42 countries. This is all the countries we have in the complete list of this data, which means with almost 200 countries in the world, that more than 150 countries are not showing up in the list of top publishing authors at all. They're not there. Out of this, also only 11% are women. And almost 90% come from only 10 countries. And the 75% what I mentioned come from these 5 countries here. Starting with the US. And this has a lot to do also with language barriers, for example, so economic backgrounds, followed by the UK. So the 2 native English-speaking countries in the world. And then followed by Australia, another native English native-speaking country, and then Germany and Canada, also Canada native-speaking, and Germany as one, like with a very strong economy, like the richest country in Central Europe. And also relevant history, no? All of these countries that we have to think about. And this is just not helping us so much, this huge bias, with effectively addressing the biodiversity and conservation issues we have in our time. Of course, we are interested also to see how did this bias change over time. We looked at the full list now. We looked at 15-year sections, 5-year sections. We sexualize these 75 years in many different ways. We always see more or less the same pattern. So this is like the most clear one we can look at. And here we see the development over time for female top publishing authors, here in this column in the respective time sections, and for what we call it in the article, the minority countries. So all the countries that were in the list, but they were a minority. So all these minority countries are the countries that represent less than 2% of all the top publishing authors. We see both started at like a very, very low percent of 3% in this section until 59. And it was steadily increasing. Even the geographic representation was increasing better than the gender representation. But still, when we look at the today's section, we have a representation of 18% female top publishing authors and 25% of these minority countries, which is only out of 42 countries. We see we are still far from representation that we need in our society. We see that this is also significantly related to gross domestic product per capita. So, of course, the economy of a country, which is largely out of our control, of course. But it's interesting to see that even if we correlate here gross domestic product per capita here in the US dollar, and the number of top publishing authors per million people for all these 42 different countries we have in the list, we see that we even can have this rough separation line with global north and global south. So we see there is a separation that we need to work on, because many of the problems we are addressing are located in the global south, so-called. We also see that these bias proportions are not related to journal identity or journal age. So the older journal are not doing better or worse than the other ones. And there's also not one journal that was doing significantly better than the other ones. We also see that the male top publishing authors generally had more papers in more journals, and they were more often, significantly more often, single authors. So even if economic backgrounds, economic interrelations are out of control for many scientists, there are many factors that are quite straightforward to address for us in a community, like immediately. And this is like the summary of 10 key actions that we identified out of this research that can be done at 3 different levels, basically the individual level, the leading authors, the editors, what I already mentioned before. So paying attention to training, self-assessing the value, and there I have like a nice overview slide coming now. But we have these recommendations on individual level, on leadership level, and society level. And what I want to show here, not reading all the 10 recommendations that you can do taking your time, but I want to summarize from this slide that that we have to work on improving diversity, equity, inclusion, all these different levels from the individual level, so everybody can do something. And societies need to be aware of their power and the opportunities and the impact that they can have on the scientific communities when they take actions on improving diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah, it's a picture that I like to show also to light up the process. It's a funny picture, but like how it's affecting our community is actually not so funny. And I think everybody publishing can relate to this a little bit. The picture of the Mona Lisa, basically where you start when you do scientific publishing from the literature, and then going through a process where many people cannot recognize their article in its final version again. Why is that? This is also because of the many biases we are facing, for example, in scientific publishing. On top of that is coming the fact that often the reviews that editor decisions are based on are unpaid. And this has been assessed in this really nice article that this is actually $1 billion donation of the scientific community. And we are carrying implicit and explicit biases throughout these processes. So this is really a huge barrier in addition to the language barriers that we're facing in scientific publishing that is holding us back. Then we have these economic barriers. So for example, the Nature Publishing Group was proudly announcing in 2001 that they now charge scientists with $9,500 and like 11,000, like this huge amount to make a paper open access. So they're proudly announcing they have this open access policy. But how accessible is this price for publishing for most people in our community, especially in conservation ecology? It's creating a huge barrier. And this means that many of our colleagues on an international level will not be able to publish in Nature anymore, just because they cannot afford it. What will this do with the upcoming leadership position? Like, what does it mean when in a later job interview, a candidate with a Nature publication is preferred over another candidate who just couldn't afford this kind of publication, was smart enough, but not rich enough, or the university was not. There's a huge debate going on. I'm quite active on Twitter. It's interesting for me to follow these kind of things. And from our community is also coming a lot of pressure and input and very good ideas how we can address this. With all the work that we have been doing, I summarized this here in one overview. And this is one approach that is basically representative of what we learned from this kind of research and what we're still learning and what we apply to all the areas we're working. So what I try to apply as an editor, as a principal investigator of project, as a supervisor, as a colleague, as an individual person, you can transfer this approach to any level, basically. And we try to simplify a lot, not because it can be that simple. In detail, maybe it's not, but we have to always start with a self-assessment. We will never be aware and never be able to work on our biases if we are not very critical and honest with ourselves. We have to face the reality and our self-assessment. And there are very nice tools. For example, look at your papers and count the women and the men. Check your own author ratios. And when did you find a huge bias? It's nothing to, it's good that you did the action and you checked it, and you check it because you want to work on it. So even if it's not optimal in the past, if it is, then congratulations, that would be awesome. But if you have a bias, and you very likely we all have a bias here in the author ratio, we know that we have to work on it, and we have a number that we have to work on. Because for some of us, this bias will be in the 5% regions. For some of us, it may be in a much higher region. We need to face this reality, starting with ourselves, then starting maybe with the working group we're leading. Check the author ratio, ask all your students, employees to do the same. Make a Excel table, make it clear, make a team meeting, work on this, talk about it. As Ivo Dami said in the beginning, let's talk about it. Let's make it transparent, talk about it, work on it step by step and in an organized way. And we need to get the numbers out. Also, for one of our articles, we got the feedback, yeah, of course we have the gender and the geographic bias. It's not surprising. Some people react to these articles like this. And I do understand in a way, but then I ask the people back, yeah, but would you have guessed out of the blue, it's 11% women? Because this is important, that we get the numbers out, that we know in a number how bad it is or how good the progress is that we made. Okay. Check the author ratios. When it's about publishing, when it's about hiring, check the hiring ratios, of course. When it's about communicating, check your emails. Maybe even let's think about, I'm responding faster to a certain group of people. This is like an endless, it's like a box of Pandora, as we say here. Once you open it, there will never stop that things are coming out. But it's good, no? Yeah, check hiring ratios, take tests. And what I really like to recommend is here this Harvard Implicit Association test. You can Google Harvard IAT or Harvard Implicit Association test. It's available for so many assessments. So you can make a test, your gender bias, religion bias, income bias related to gender. It's a huge list of possible biases that you can assess there. It takes really short time. It's super well developed, available in many languages. Do it, please. Especially the leaders, these academic leaders listening to this talk, please do it and take action really fast. It's for your best, for the best of your group, and the best of all of our future. Really. So, and if you discover a huge bias in your group, on yourself, do something about it. Take a training. Many universities offer already gender inclusion training. Now in Elsevier, for example, in the publishing group, we have a lot of trainings they offer. Do these trainings. We all need them. This is implicit bias. We grow up with the stereotypes. It's not a bad thing to have them. I think it's just, to put it really frankly, a bad thing to not work on them and to ignore them and to just assume I'm awesome, I don't have a bias. This is very likely not true. And it's normal. Okay, once we have faced the reality, we have the numbers of all kind of biases relevant to us, then we want to do something about it, so we develop something. For example, in publishing, it would be we implement a double or even triple blind review, which has been shown to really be effective in increasing the number of female authors, of the representation of other countries, and so on. As I said, this is a template you can address to different fields. So you can also do blinded job applications, anonymous feedback in your group, anonymize and not taking out the biases of, there are many ways how we can do it. We develop this, we try it out, then we implement it. No, we write, it's quite straightforward and easy. So it's why I explain like this. You write to your group. So now we have this anonymous feedback. Please do it once a month. Here's a link or there's a post box. You implement it in a way, and then you have to evaluate again. And you go back to the self-assessment and you start the circle from the beginning. And we go through the circle all our career, hopefully, again and again and again. And in the center of this progress, it's very helpful and very much needed. We have transparency. So tell your group, your working group, or your colleagues about the bias that you find, because I found that to be very inspiring and motivating action in my community. And some key tasks is also that we have to look beyond, for example, only publishing performance, because we have seen in this presentation, it's highly biased. It's often related to income, so economic power, not only the power of the mind, the quality of the data, but really if you can afford publishing somewhere. So in our hiring decisions, for example, or editorial decisions, we have to take into account alternative metrics. So not what is the impact factor of the journal, but when it's an article, for example, and I do a lot of research on land use. So a good assessment is to see how much do I talk to policy, how much do I communicate my work with stakeholders. And this is all beyond only my publishing paper success. We need to work on equal opportunities, what I mentioned before, and I have to.
Sorry, Bea.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. What I mentioned before, we have to work on equal opportunities. We're talking a lot about gender ratio. So we need to achieve the 50% women in our team. If we are ecologists and conservationists, we know very well it's also not about species numbers. It's often not about the number of species, it's about their functions, it's about the quality of the species composition, and it's the same in our scientific community. So even if we have less women in the team, but they are in leadership positions, they are leading the whole team, they are in like hiring positions. In general, we want to really reach equality, but a qualitative one and not a quantitative one. Transparency, for example, do climate surveys in your project. And all these new practices should be accompanied by measures and evaluation. So also if you have the power as a leader in your university, for example, and you do not have a training available, please write an email to the rectorate, to the dean, that you would like to have such a training. And we also know in our academic community, many of us just become leaders one day without having a training on these issues. And then we get responsibility for really many, many young students. But we're basically biologists and not trained in being like, group leaders. Some of us train for this, but some also not. And I think we also have to overcome this. So we are coming to summaries. We have to give credit where credit is due. We know that diverse teams are more productive, innovative, and impactful, and biased top authorship may lead also this biased leadership. We are really missing essential perspectives to address global biodiversity issues. And I was mainly talking about gender and geographic bias, but there is so much more to think about. And I also like to talk at this point about, for example, character bias. There are many studies showing that academic communities are biased towards really outgoing, expressive characters, sometimes even narcissist characters. But we also need the perspective of the more silent ones, for example. So also think of a psychology or like a character profile diversity when you put together your team. We know there's this huge interrelationship, interdependency of the SDGs. We have to work on gender equality, reduce inequalities, and better partnerships to achieve these goals. And then just really quickly, I just highlight that we have been publishing more on this topic. So we took the same data set that I presented to you, and we found that also the editorial boards are biased. And many of these actions that we recommend in this article published in Trends in Ecology and Evolution, I already highlighted here. So we find, again, we take the same data, we find not only for authors, we find also that the editors behind these decisions also have this huge bias we have to work on, and we suggest many actions. And I see that many of these things, but still not enough, are implemented in many journals. Then one of my colleagues, a former PhD student of our group, wrote this excellent article with an excellent set of authors about global South leadership towards inclusive tropical ecology and conservation. So she's, Carolina and all her colleagues, very explicitly talking about the particular problems we're facing in the tropics. And also here, we suggest key actions at the institutional, national, and international levels to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion on a better level on a global scale. And we also acknowledge here that the recognition of science in the Global South may improve through outreach activities. And the last article I want to highlight is this one on the cross-disciplinary approaches for better research. Here we looked at the case of birds and bats, and we show, on the one hand, it's really important, there's a huge difference between disciplinary, multi, inter, and transdisciplinary research, but very often these terms are just used as synonyms by different science, as they would be all the same. They are not. And they are at an increased level of integration of perspective and diversity, for example, here. And this is crucial to understand to improve scientific approaches and scientific implementation also into practice at different levels. You see all the different, so if you want to have arguments for your boss, for your university, for whomever, why you should work on this, I'm happy to share this presentation also on my website, or you look at this article where you have like a long list of quantitative and qualitative arguments for working on diversity, equity, inclusion, but also transdisciplinarity. My last slide. I'm not like, I am often asked for career advice. So very, very often asked. And I see that there's a large response, especially also from my students. They, this is a topic becoming more and more important, especially for young generations, what we see in many actions. So, and it's of course only my individual perspective I can put together here and my experience, but especially to the young people in this talk, I want to say, really believe in and develop your own profile. Don't try to adapt. So don't try to be a white man. Try to be yourself. And because you really have to contribute something, we have to combine focus and flexibility in our work. Maybe this is a bit vague here, but I'm happy to discuss it. It's very important to know your possibilities and also your rights, especially when you're part of a minority group. Very important to know your rights. It's some more additional research you have to do, but it will help you later. Very important to act professionally, but always stay true to yourself and pay attention to diversity at all these levels. It will help you a lot on a lot of your own levels, personal and professional ones. So I thank you so much for your attention and look forward to an exciting discussion. And yeah, thank you so much. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Bea, for inspiring talk. In the beginning, Budami mentions about the core of sustainability is, at the heart of sustainability located in the local knowledge, right? So you translated that into the colonizations of knowledge productions related to, conservations. And it also addresses what IPBES described in the report that, you cannot tackle systems transformations. You cannot transform the systems without addressing power relations. So this is what you discuss about these power relations in knowledge productions, how, the status at the local context. And I think it's really important about you to describe that diversity, equity, and inclusions can have like really three main elements if you would like to encourage innovations, to generate innovations, if you would like also to make like really productive knowledge productions, and also impactful knowledge production. So this is like really diversity is at the core. And I think diversity is also at the core of transdisciplinarity. And you mentioned about how to reach diversity through the assessments and evaluations, which also tackles another core of transdisciplinary, which is reflections. I think another one that I would like also to open up our discussions, not only about the capacity, but also capability. So now, Marta Nussbaum mentions about the capability approach, how to tackle these power relations in terms of knowledge productions, how to provide this kind of opportunity, how to tackle this imbalance power relations. You mentioned about the actions, proposed actions from the individual levels, until the societal level. So it has to be transformed. It has to be transformed in systematically. Maaf, itu ada mic yang terbuka, mungkin ini host bisa mute mic yang terbuka kecuali untuk speaker. Terima kasih. So without further ado, I open this floor for the discussions. Please, if you have some questions, you can also unmute yourself. Also, if you would like to post the questions in Bahasa Indonesia, feel free to do so. I will gladly translate it into English, or you can also write it in the chats to start having discussions. So, silahkan. Rekan-rekan, Ibu, Bapak yang mau mengajukan pertanyaan bisa juga dalam bahasa Indonesia, nanti saya coba akan, atau juga bisa mengetik di chat. Silakan unmute yourself. Mungkin raise your hands before. And if you would like to pose questions to Bea, feel free. Silahkan. Silahkan. I think people need to digest it. People need to. Silahkan. People need to digest the presentations of yours. Which is quite interesting because you mentioned about the diversity at the core of ecosystems resilience. So just like diversity is not only in the biodiversity and also intellectual diversity. Yeah, intellectual diversity is also very much important if we would like to strengthen the systems, transform the systems. Silahkan rekan-rekan, ada yang mau bertanya? Ada yang mau mengetik, silahkan, atau mungkin komentar, silahkan. Dari Pak Surya, dari Bu Dami, silahkan. While waiting for other to pose the questions, I have the questions for you. Oh, Bu Dami, raise a hand, silahkan.
Oke. Kedengeran suara saya ya?
Kedengar.
Oke. Okay, Bea. Wow, very heavy presentation. Wonderful presentation and thought-provoking. But you know, you face very difficult subject. As you mentioned right from the start, it's sometimes you don't even know your biases because it's inside you and you don't know that it's biases. So how do you actually I'm not really asking a question, I'm just thinking out loud here. So we are living in this world where different part of the world has different culture. So how do you separate culture from the biases if that has been ingrained within you ever since childhood? So I think it won't be easy for many people because it goes back to the type of education that you have received. So do you think that higher education do they provide that space where you grow, when you can unlearn what you have been learning all this time about those biases? Is there a space in universities, for instance? I mean, maybe in Western, one would expect that Western sciences or Western countries are more ready for that, but it's not so, right? So
exactly.
I mean, if you guys who we think are more, I don't know, open-minded and not, then what's going to happen to the world? And so where do we start? Maybe that's my question. Where do we start?
Where do we start? Excellent. But also there's so many. The good and the bad news is I think that we can start at so many different points, and we should, because there's still so much to do. And that requires a decision that we have to make. But I think really what we start with doing something about it, whatever we do. The important thing is really we do something about it. Is it, working on the one field or the other? Then, of course, the other comment is very, very complex. I completely agree with you. We also have to acknowledge the limitations that we have a lot. And I think, for example, what I can say from my background, having a lot of my education in Central Europe, but then also every story is different. I was very lucky to grow up internationally. but not with a lot of money. For example, I have raised by a single mom, very international, living in many countries, not only rich global north countries, but mostly. So for sure, a huge privilege. Also, the privilege I benefit from several privileges. Then I also have a disbenefit as being one of the minority groups in science whatsoever. It's really complex for everybody of us. What I want to say in common to that we really need to acknowledge the limitations, which I think we're not doing enough in our scientific community. So it means, for example, that only the education of someone in the global north and the knowledge, for example, about biodiversity development in the global south does not make that person an expert. But this is very often how it's implemented, no? So it's important, and this is a topic, a huge topic for me. I find it quite interesting that the fact that we study, so when we just talk about academics, that the fact that we study is in general not making the community or the individuals more humble. But I think the outcome of every study and learning should always be that we actually don't know anything, no? Because there's so much to know. So we should be very humble. I would like to see that more in the community. So we, in addition to what I said, what I can add here now and end here now is we need to listen better and ask more. This is very important. Also, as a point to start, we can do every day. And something I know we can train a lot. And it's, for example, also something I put a lot of attention to in supervising students, to create you were asking about culture. So we should create a respectful culture in our scientific communities where listening and asking questions is part of the normal exchange. So with this, I would really like to hear from you what you think where we should start. What is your experience?
Wow. Now, so this is a conversation. Completely agree with you. I think it should start from home. Yeah, education at home. I really like the way you say, if you learn, you learn more. You study, you learn more. You become humble. So I think that's key, being humble. And it's ironic that we see how many people then actually they have this higher education, but then they don't have this humbleness. So I don't know how you can create an education, or how you can develop a type of education that the end result is humbleness. It's very rare these days. People want to show off, and with all the social media, that's another thing, that people just have to show the achievements that they have. So in this modern age, I think it is more challenging to be humble and to not show who you are, because the society expects you to show who you are. So there is this contradiction of sustainability with the character, of humbleness, etc. And then actually what education is leading towards more and more selfishness. So I think ecology actually provides more opportunity for people to find that humbleness. I mean, yeah. Maybe I'm biased because I'm an ecologist, but I think tropical ecology, or ecology in general, really provides that space for people to learn from nature, to understand our position in the midst of
originalitas itu ada pernyataannya.
Okay.
Somebody's speaking.
Somebody's speaking, yeah.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Budami and
Thanks.
Bea. I think one of the things that I learned from your discussions is we need this intellectual humility. Yeah? This is one of the attributes why to tackle this power imbalance, intellectual humility. But there are also another issue that we would like to also dismantle here. On one side, there's like issue of attributes here, so intellectual humility, but there also another side which is like really the power, really power on in the sense of really power imbalance in structural manners. So there's individual level. Of course, we can also have this kind of intellectual humility, particularly as Bea also described, should be owned by the editors, the one in power, the one who make these decisions making editor when they receive, submissions. So that they have to consider this diversity at the core of the publications. But what about also dismantled of this truly like structural imbalance, as Bea mentions about there's so many publications held by the northern part of the western part, and not so much in the publications and or compositions of the editor themselves, like not really inclusive. Like Bea mentions about 11% of women as an editors, and 75% of those 11 women are located only in 5 countries, which are actually, have that kind of sources, power. So how to distribute this kind of power in structural levels? Maybe I will continue that discussions. Bea, if you would like to give some feedback on that.
Yeah. So, and again, from my perspective and the background, it's very important to acknowledge here, making really fast, changing something in the top-down decision-making we have is critical. And a concrete example to that, again, for example, with publishing is I see as an editor, I sometimes cannot invite 50% women that they are not in my database. For some articles, I have to invite 10 people, up to 20 people to get the 2 reviewers that I want. No, I have to, because I get many rejections, declines, people have no time. Even in this large number. So I usually start for an article. It would be the standard for me to invite 2 to 3 reviewers. No, and the other ones are in queued. So if one of the 2 or 3 is declining, the next one is rising up. Okay. Sometimes for some articles, I don't find a single woman available as a reviewer. And not even I don't mean that the woman says yes, I mean a woman in the database. I do literature research. I don't find related articles of female scientists. So there I'm limited. And then we see that, for example, the biased editorial board is making biased decisions. It could be the best people in the world with the best intentions, but they still, for example, carry implicit bias, and maybe even more. Maybe also they carry explicit bias. It's also existing in our community, a lot. And so the journal is really responsive in the first place that we have, as you say, that the powerful positions there are editors. And for example, in a small editorial board like Biological Conservation, which is an impactful journal in conservation, the smaller the board is, the higher the responsibility on every person. So it's really up to the journal to really fast have diversity there, because this more diverse team of editors will increase the diversity on the reviewer level. In the other direction, it's much, much more difficult. So it's one example. I'm happy to give more examples if this was not so clear, but it's one example that I want to use for my response on how we have to work on the structural inequality. A lot has to be top down. We really, that the tops have to be changed as fast as possible with a qualitative approach. I'm also very happy to hear from it doesn't have to be a question, but I'm very, very happy to hear from the audience feedback on what we were discussing. So what are you facing? No, structural equality. What are the main challenges? What are maybe also the opportunities that you have that you see others don't have maybe? And yeah, or back to Dami's question, where should we start? Where from your point of view, where it's important to start? Because I think these kind of conversations are really key to develop our understanding and improve. So happy to hear from you.
Silahkan rekan-rekan, Ibu Bapak, for those of you who already published or plan to publish, what kind of challenges and also opportunities are there to articulate your scientific findings or your perspective? Silahkan. Mbak Dami tadi sudah memulainya dengan cara melihat dari perspektif ini dibentuk dari pendidikan. Silahkan. Bisa berbagi juga pengalaman barangkali terkait. I mean, you can share also the experience in publishing, your work. What kind of challenges and opportunities that you see in publishing your works? Feel free to share here. Kan?
Sorry, the sound quality. Shall I go on until we get more questions? Okay, with the publishing, I'm very passionate in this, so I could talk too much about it, but I think I really want to highlight something I see like seems to be my very special interest. I'm working a lot on it, and I'm very lucky that I have an editor-in-chief who's listening a lot to this. And it's a language barrier. It's really the language barrier where I don't agree with in large part, because, and I shorten it a bit, but I think then it's clearer. So very often we have this expectation standard in scientific publishing, and the better the journal, the more we have it, that it needs to be the perfect California English. No, but this is not publishing, and this is also not available to almost everybody. It's only available to the Californian English native speakers, which is like a tiny part of our world. This is a huge bias affecting us. And a scientific paper, in my understanding, so two things. No, one thing we talk about a publication. How often are these products, these manuscripts, really public? There's the word public in it, but it's like really peculiar. It's very often not public and accessible. And I do not only mean the paywalls that we sometimes know the article, you have to pay to read it. It has also be accessible to be understood. And my experience there, I could talk about many things, but my experience is really that the articles of non-native speakers are much better understood by many people because they don't use the most complex vocabulary and so on. So actually more people can understand. A scientific article should be a recipe that is replicable. So everybody can take your article, repeat it, should come to very similar or the same results. This is what a scientific article is. It's a recipe, and maybe in the end we have also some opinions, recommendations, what we clearly flag at this. Yeah. But the language barrier we're putting on this and the effects of this, there are like amazing articles of my colleagues, Maru Tatsuya, which you also find as a co-author of Martin Nunes, for example, I was showing. They show also very clearly, really quantitatively what this is doing with our community. So one thing that I work a lot on and I advocate a lot for stopping the approach of the language review that we have in scientific publishing, because this is just unfair and it's not leading to what we want. We want a clear, replicable paper. And this doesn't have to be in California English. And it would be really nice to translate more. And their last comment, I have so much hope in the future of translation tools, no? Because some of the phones can already do that. You access a page and your phone is automatically asking you if it should translate to your local language or your phone language. No, so, and I think this can do a lot with our community, and I really hope that also the powerful journals, universities, leaders are investing into this, that we get beyond the language barriers and we can improve talking and listening to each other through that a lot. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Bea. This is really important. Language matters. So, but also people express, articulate their deep thinking more into their native language, their own language. So you have like really different kind of layers when you translate it into English, and it's already, there's always reductions in the meaning, even the slightest bit, always reductions in the meaning, how to translate from local even to nationals and now to English. So different type of language, and also very much represents of what kind of realities, constructions of realities that you would like to present in using that language.
Even
so
dialect sometimes, no?
Yes, even
Just
dialect.
a tiny anecdote to this, but I did my PhD in Germany, in northern Germany. But the German that I speak is more from far in the south, and it's a dialect.
Yeah.
And so, but it's both German. People would say, like, I realized when I did my PhD and I was talking to my friends in northern Germany, I never had the feeling I could completely express myself, only if I would visit my friends and family.
Yeah.
And I felt it's because of the language. So sometimes it's even, you need your, like a dialect to completely express yourself, but it's something we can work on. And also when we talk about it, but we need to reflect on, for example, if two people are talking about passion and one, like they talk often in the scientific community. So, my native language is German, yours is Indonesian, I guess. And we're talking in English now, in a third language.
Yeah,
we should
so
create more awareness.
No,
when we talk about a certain word, like, I don't know, the word passion, the word whatever, effort, maybe I mean really something different because of my background than you, and we talk about it in a third language. Think about it. It's very interesting. Yeah.
As an anthropologist, I work a lot on local languages. So here in Indonesia, we have hundreds of local languages. So if I would like to really understand, like really deep knowledge from, for instance, context in Papua, then I have to try to understand the emic perspective of the local context. So there are different kind of layers from Papuans, and even in Papuans, there's so many hundreds of languages, right? So to Indonesians, the way I think, and also to English, so different type of language, like really different layers and kind of like multiple realities. Why in your case, you have dialect, but in our case, it's totally different language. So our local language and Indonesians and then English. So there's not only about translations from Indonesians to English. So there are many different kind of layers that we have to go through to articulate our thinking, to articulate our insights. For me, to articulate myself in English, I have to go through different kind of layers of thinking, because language is, the construction, social constructions, how we perceive the realities, and we articulate it in a scientific language, also different matters, because that when you talk about implicit language, you talk also about the constructions of reality. And there's also a research done among anthropologists, how the female anthropologists from, like, for instance, in Southeast Asia, how to articulate their findings is totally different if compared, from male anthropologists or even like a white anthropologist. Male and white anthropologists, a totally different kind of how to articulate the scientific findings. So many different type of layers, put so much effort. And even you talk about the equity from somebody who like ourselves from Indonesia. So we have to go through like, how is it, balancing of the power. And not to mention, if you would like to aim for like really highest integrations in transdisciplinary In interdisciplinary, you can articulate in one language, which is like really formal educations. Yeah, but if you want to go through the transdisciplinary, it means that it's not only about your constructions of reality as a scientist, but also you would like to include another constructions of knowledge from the local community, say indigenous people, yeah, local community, and that's I think is our challenge is to like really put aim for the systems transformations, not only among the academic community, imbalance power between different continents, but also deepen power relations between academic and non-academic. How can we also appreciate experience-based knowledge equally as the same as formal knowledge, as we talk in the same language? So the language of scientists, the language of tacit knowledge, the language of me as a person coming from in Indonesia. So there are different kind of multiple identities that we need to consider. Thank you so much. But from our discussions, I think
wonderful. Let me thank you. Let me thank you first for this comment, because it's extremely important, and maybe also the transfer to practice was coming a little bit too short in my talk. So thank you so much about this. This is so much key, because different languages, even if we speak the very same language or local language, we have a different language. Maybe if we are a scientist or we are a farmer or politics, also this. So thank you so much for this. It's so important and wonderful what you say. Very exciting. So I hope to stay in touch about this.
I'm inspired by your talk. Thank you so much. This has also inspired me also to think deeper about this, language representations, it matters. So thanks so much, everybody, for being here. Badami, are you there? Yes, you would like to give really maybe concluding?
Mungkin saya switch ke dalam bahasa Indonesia aja ya. Jadi pada teman-teman yang masih ada di sini, diskusi hari ini kita cukup berat ya. Jadi apa yang disampaikan Mbak Bea ini sebetulnya sangat penting, terutama bagi kita di negara di negara berkembang dan perempuan lagi. Jadi perjuangan kita masih panjang, tapi kita harus bekerja bersama-sama bagaimana membuat diri kita, orang-orang dari negara berkembang dan perempuan gitu, bisa betul-betul go international, dihormati, dipercaya, etc. Jadi pekerjaannya nggak mudah, tapi sangat bisa, terutama kalau kita bersatu. Jadi bersatulah kita. Itu aja, Yulia.
Bersatulah kita. Yeah, indeed. Collective action is the best. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for the inspiring talk. Terima kasih banyak rekan-rekan atas kehadirannya. Nanti silahkan bisa dilihat di websitenya Bea. If you would like also to download the slides from Bea, you can also go to her website. She will upload her website in beamas.com. Thank you so much, and stay healthy and happy, everybody. Bye.
Terima kasih Bea. Makasih Yulia.
Makasih.
Terima kasih banyak sekali.
Thank you for everyone who's here.
Pleasure. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.